There, and in this episode of Effective Evolution, we are going over the panorama that is PIA 2417. And with this particular panorama, this is with the MRO, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and its networks or whatnot. And when you get acquainted with this topography, you will notice that certain areas are very picturesque. And we're going to use various probing tools such as Paint Shop and GIMP and the infrared um, technique as well, which is using the camera at shorter wavelengths, i.e., at the infrared part of the spectrum. And also the dodge instrument, the burn instrument, and the exposure and contrast brightness tools. And we'll get on that right now. Have a nice time and thank you for your time once again. Hello there, and welcome to Effective Evolution. Today it's PIA 24147, and this is with the MRO, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and its networks. And the topography is immense and gives some very beautiful panoramas to usurp. And we'll look at certain areas and also incorporate various probing techniques. And with this episode of Effective Evolution, we're exploring PIA 24147. And this is the first area that we'll probe. Now, as you can determine, there are some very interesting linear designs here, and it might be somewhat pixelated, but hopefully you could make out that there are some vivid structures here. And now we'll use the infrared tool, and that is when the MRO's telescope, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's telescope, is using the shorter wavelength version. That's at the red side as opposed to the ultraviolet side with longer wavelengths. And as you can see, some more structures can be determined here, as well as certain layers, i.e., various depths or whatnot. Are these some type of alien districts, suburbs, or whatnot? And here are some of the highlighted areas to make that a bit more noticeable or whatnot. And as you can see, there are some very planned types of patterns here, and it definitely could be created by an otherworldly civilization. And going over this area in the infrared, just rotating it around a bit, you'll be able to determine that there are some very vivid designs here. There also seems to be different levels, and as we rotate this around, you may notice that those structures are still there. As a matter of fact, they might be a bit more familiar. And just let your eyes get a little familiar. And hopefully, this rotation will bring out another perspective where you can notice more. And with this particular area, which represents a quote, metropolitan extraterrestrial region on Mars, it's still the panorama of 24147, PIA 24147. And notice that there are quite symmetrical linear patterns here, and also structures that could be various districts for this particular area on Mars. And as you get more familiar with it, we could play around with some more tools. For example, the brightness contrast. And notice how there does appear to be planning, and it's very attractive to have these structures just presenting themselves to you, and you can determine that these patterns might not be made by Mother Nature alone, i.e., they have every indication of being planned. And just going over some of these areas, you can't help but notice that these patterns are very creative and indicate that they've been planned as well. And now, just adding some more light on this, you can see that those particular creations are still there. And there does appear to be some layering, i.e., depth of various levels or whatnot to these structures. And it would be otherwise with regards to being just a random type of designed by nature per se. And this is just one, of course, of the many areas. And this particular area is nicknamed the Met area for metropolitan area or whatnot. A metropolitan otherworldly area on Mars with this PIA 24147 area. And now we're using the Zeek tool. And notice how those linear patterns are still there. Somewhat more noticeable now as we play around with the various techniques of probing. Notice all of these patterns or whatnot. And now we're going to rotate it a bit and notice how those designs and creations are still there. Very indicative of a civilized type of architecture and planning. Notice that the detail seems to be more pronounced at this time. And we're going to incorporate some other techniques, of course. Mind you, you can always get some very flabbergasting results with the compass brightness tool and the exposure tool or whatnot. And now we're going to use the infrared tool. And notice that there does appear to be some depth here, layers, different levels or whatnot to these structures and the whole urban design of this panorama. Not only have a gander at some of the areas with some highlight, you can see that there are vivid structures here. Please go over this at your leisure or choice time or whatnot. It looks like a previous river basin on Mars, a river channel or whatnot, and you could probably determine some structures already. Are they city dwellings around here, in here as well, and on the upper ridge? And just to play around with some of the probing tools, such as the exposure tool and whatnot, you could probably discern some very interesting patterns here. At, seems to be at a lower depth here, and this seems to be the top part of this panorama, and here as well seems to be an elevated capacity or whatnot. And for sure, you can determine those patterns right now. Perhaps more vivid ideas with the contrast brightness tool. Definitely some patterns here that seem to be otherworldly architecture. And with a more shadowy tint, we get this. You could determine there are some interesting structures here, here, all along here, and hopefully here as well. Remember that this is ice, frozen material, and please determine with your own speculation what these patterns could indicate. Would these be dwellings, civilized dwellings, or whatnot? And these would be some of the areas to note with the highlighting. There are many, many more, of course. And with the infrared, that is having the MRO's telescope at shorter wavelengths, you can see that there are perhaps some more levels here. And those structures are still there. Although this area would probably be the lower portion of the river channel or whatnot, you can see there's some intricate designs in there. And what are we having a gander at here? And this would be the upper elevation, of course. And rotating that a bit, you can see perhaps those areas again, and perhaps they're more vivid now. Notice the symmetry and linear patterns.
quite interesting to speculate on, you must admit. Definitely some planned topological architecture here.
This panorama PIA 24147 with the various techniques such as the paint shop software and GIMP and using the infrared instrument as well, you must admit that the various areas are pretty intriguing. And the creations and the planning of all of those designs does seem to indicate that there is some type of advanced civilization here. And until next time, continue your exploration. And thank you once again for your probing with this area PIA 24147 on behalf of the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and its partners. Thank you for your time.